Well, good morning. Today, I want to go over what I expected to happen during the first half of 2023 from an astrological perspective. And then I'll also look at what I've observed to have happened this year. And hopefully, expected and observed will match up pretty well. So, first thing I need to do is share my screen. So just give me a moment here. And I have to move some things around a bit. Just make a few quick adjustments. Okay. And I think we're ready to go. So, astrology for the first half of 2023, observed and expected. Okay. Now, I want to point out this before I say anything else. I don't really make predictions. To me, astrology, it's more like a weather report. I can look at the planetary configurations and estimate probabilities of certain events happening or give sort of a general overview of what is expected. Okay. It's also very much like a quantum wave function. These quantum wave functions are also called probability functions because they don't show exactly what's going to happen, but they do give probabilities that a particle may be found over here or over there, somewhere else. Astrology, in my opinion, works exactly the same way. Okay, now let's get started. At the beginning of the year, we had transiting Mars conjunct natal Uranus in the July 1776 charts for America. There's more than one chart from that month that people use for America. I prefer the July 2nd chart for the passage of the resolution for independence. But what I say here, it's going to apply to all those charts. And in the month of January 2023, uh, the planet Mars had slowed down, was about to turn retrograde, and spent almost the entire month at 8 plus degrees Gemini, which put it in conjunction with natal Uranus at 8 plus degrees Gemini, and all of these July 1776 charts. Now, what you expect from uh, an aspect like this is probably rebelliousness, revolution, violence, but also maybe some inventiveness because Gemini has a connection with the mind and thinking, and Uranus can be a lot of creativity. Well, I'm sure some spectacular inventiveness probably happened in America in January 2023, but not so much that it made the news to where I heard about it. Uh, these other things I expected, I definitely saw things related to these items in the news. For instance, remember the year began with several rebellious members of the House of Representatives. They blocked the election of a new speaker until the 15th ballot. Uh, so that's where a lot of the revolution was going on. Also, I've read that January 2023 was the most violent January on record for gun violence with respect to gun violence. And additionally, in late December, when Mars was at about 9 degrees of Gemini, very, very close to this 8 plus degrees Gemini, there were attacks on electrical grids. And attacks, these are ruled by Mars, electrical grids, that corresponds to Uranus. So that fit in perfectly with what one might expect under this kind of conjunction. Okay, now also in January, transiting Mars was conjunct natal Saturn in Biden's chart for the entire month. He has Saturn at 9 degrees Gemini, and transiting Mars was at 8 plus degrees Gemini. So that's very, very close. And this went on for the entire month. This suggests that there might be some illness or attacks, criticism, or frustrations throughout the month of January. And what was observed was the discovery in Biden's home and office of classified documents and other records that belong to the government. And that was in the news for the entire month. Because Mars was moving so slowly, I really expected it to be on the headline news until about the end of January. Okay, now another way in which I can look at what was going on with this transit is by looking at what we call Biden's Mars-Saturn arc transform chart. So what's an arc transform chart? Well, an arc transform chart can take, for example, two planets, which may be separated by several degrees, and it essentially mathematically divides out the distance between those two planets to put them into conjunction. So it's like taking something and just sort of stretching it until you have those two points in conjunction. And the reason we can do something like this, use a chart like this to help us understand transits, is because remember, no matter what aspect the transiting planet is making to a natal planet, it's just one phase in a cycle that begins with a conjunction, ends with a conjunction. So in the arc transform chart, we can force Mars and Saturn in Biden's natal chart into conjunction, and that tells us what the end game is going to be here. It's really very interesting because when we do that, we find Mars and Saturn conjunct in Virgo in the 11th house. What does that tell me? Well, it tells me Biden is going to cooperate uh, and collaborate with the groups or people involved in this investigation. And since this conjunction occurs in Virgo in the arc transform chart, he will be meticulous and down to the last detail in cooperating with these people. But at the same time, look at this. He has Moon in the 8th house in Gemini. Gemini has to do with communication. The Moon is his personality. 8th house often likes to be secretive about things. This tells me that even though he's going to cooperate fully, he really doesn't want to talk about this thing. He doesn't want to talk about this story. And this is reinforced by having Scorpio, the 8th sign in the zodiac, rising in this particular arc transform chart, and the sun in the 12th house where things kind of stay hidden. We also see that in the arc transform chart. So he cooperates down to the last detail, but he doesn't really want to talk about this. He wants to move on. And that's exactly what we saw happening in January 2023. Okay, moving on to March 7th, 2023, transiting Saturn entered Pisces for about the next 3 years. Now, what's expected with this sign change is that old structures will start crumbling, but also Saturn and Pisces can help us turn dreams into concrete realities. There could also be mishaps involving water, since Saturn is restriction and Pisces is a water sign. But then over the next few years, I expect a weakening of Russia's government. And why is that? Well, this is because Saturn is now co-present with Neptune in Pisces. That makes it kind of like a conjunction. And 3 years from now in early February, they will be conjunct. Right at the beginning of Aries. Wow. Russia has a history of being affected by conjunctions of Saturn and Neptune. In 1917, we had a conjunction that was followed by the Bolshevik Revolution. In 1952, there's another conjunction that coincided with the death of Stalin and the subsequent de-Stalinization of the Soviet Union. In 1989, there was a conjunction that was followed by the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the Soviet Union. Okay, so between now and uh, about around February 2026, I expect there to be a lot of changes in Russia and at least a weakening of its government and possibly removal of Vladimir Putin or maybe a complete collapse of the government once again. So, getting back to what I have here, all of the above have been observed and isolated events, including the end, Saturn, of COVID. Pisces, ruled by Neptune, has to do with infections. Uh, serve the end of COVID as a public emergency and the collapse of the structure, Saturn, of the Titan submersible, water. But this is a long-term aspect and time will tell. So, like I said, it's not always that easy to look at what's happened so far and say that this event or that event is definitely an indication of Saturn and Pisces. The thing which has happened, which to me is the strongest bit of evidence, is how both in America and worldwide, we've gone from this feeling of being in an active pandemic with COVID to the emergency being over. We can now dissolve those restrictions, old structures crumbling. And COVID is still with us, but it's much more manageable now. So here and abroad, we feel like the public emergency has ended. Uh, Russia seems to be weaker than it was right now, weaker than it was. Right now, it seems to be weaker than it was last March uh, when Saturn entered Pisces, and certainly last February. Now, the collapse of the structure of the Titan submersible, which was a horrible tragedy, that could just be a coincidence that this happened. It's really hard to say. But in the long run, uh, the change in our response, the urgency of COVID, that is quite noticeable. And like I said, I think we're going to see a lot of changes in Russia over the next few years. And we just have to keep an eye on other things to see what really happens in the long run in response to Saturn going through Pisces. Okay, on March 11th, we had transiting Jupiter conjunct transiting Chiron in Aries, and I expected something wonderfully transcendent involving individual spirituality or spiritual warriors. In other videos, I've gone back to the early 1900s to look at what happens whenever Jupiter comes into conjunction with Chiron. We often associate Chiron with wounding, but its real impetus is it wants us to transcend uh, our, the lives that we see. It wants us to go beyond what we currently know. And in the process, it often has to crack us open a little bit so that the light can get in. Okay. And whenever Jupiter has come into conjunction with Chiron from 1900 to the present, I've always seen something wonderful occur, which is different, new, transcendent, and is always in connection with the sign that Jupiter and Chiron are in. The last time Jupiter and Chiron were in Aries was, I believe, around 1976. And that is when they began the filming of Star Wars in that month. And in Star Wars, you had this focus on this new kind of spirituality, the Force. And the Jedi Knights were the spiritual warriors who were in tune with this force that connects everything in the universe, and they fought for good. So I've been expecting something along those lines as a result of the conjunction on March 11th. But I was also aware that sometimes it's several years before we understand what has occurred. For instance, during a Jupiter Chiron conjunction in the 90s, J.K. Rowling suddenly got her inspiration for the entire Harry Potter series, but it was 7 years before that first book was published. So I knew it could take a time, and I was looking around and I didn't really see anything in particular that I thought would be reflective of Jupiter conjunct Chiron in Aries until last night. Uh, just last night, we watched the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I realized that this movie has a very particular spiritual undertone, which is perfectly in harmony with what one would expect with Jupiter conjunct Chiron and Aries. So, what I've written here is on March 12th. That's the day after the exact conjunction. The movie Everything Everywhere All at Once wins the Oscar for Best Picture. This picture depicts travel through the multiverse that has deep spiritual undertones similar to Ecclesiastes, while also involving several martial arts sequences. Now, the movie itself, it was conceived and made before that Jupiter Chiron conjunction, but in this case, it's winning the Oscar the next day. That's like that full moon moment, that moment when everything the movie was about suddenly comes into bloom, uh, and very close connection with Jupiter conjunct Chiron. Some of the spiritual themes of this movie are that we live in both a literal and a metaphorical multiverse. You see the literal multiverse being depicted in the movie as the script writer envisioned it, but it's also a metaphorical multiverse because it's about uh, Chinese, Asian people that have immigrated from their homeland into this country, and that is literally like moving from one universe into another. Okay. Also in this movie, we saw a single individual can save the world and the multiverse. Additionally, things don't matter as much as we think they do. That's like Ecclesiastes, that famous phrase, vanity of vanity, all is vanity, can be more accurately translated as futility of futility, all is futile, or hot air of hot airs, it's just a bunch of hot air, not that important, usually lacking in substance. Another theme of the movie was that it's up to us to find and define what is meaningful in our lives. And lastly, and very importantly, we can find beauty and perfection within the experience of the present moment. You see that also in Ecclesiastes, where it talks about finding joy in the food you eat, the work that makes your life meaningful, and with your spouse, your loved ones. Okay, so I was very happy to be able to finally see that movie last night. And like I said, its themes fit in perfectly with what Jupiter conjunct Chiron in Aries is all about. Okay, let's see. On March 17th, transiting Chiron was in opposition to natal Chiron and all of the USA July 1776 charts. Now, what I expected was both wounding and possibly transcendence as a result of past actions. And in particular, I've noticed under this kind of aspect, one often sees severe weather, violence, abortion, and LGBT LGBTQ news. And what was observed was failures of Silvergate Bank, Silicon Valley Bank, and Signature Bank. March 23rd nor'easter caused widespread damage. Tornado outbreaks killed 58 people. Transgender rights bill signed in Minnesota. On the other hand, Walgreens restricted the sale of abortion pills in states with Republican-dominated legislatures. Also, we had 40 mass shootings. And then additionally, Marianne Williamson, she announced another bid for the presidency in March 2023. I don't think she's going to win. It looks like her campaign is going to end soon. But I put this down here because uh, she has a very transcendent spiritual philosophy, which is in line with the higher aspects of Chiron, that drive of Chiron to make us transcend this ordinary physical reality. So in that respect, I saw this as aligning quite well with this opposition between transiting Chiron and natal Saturn in these USA charts. Okay, on March 23rd of 2023, transiting Pluto entered Aquarius, where it's going to spend about 21 years. Now, what is expected under this lengthy passage through Aquarius is a transfer of power to people or to groups, group and humanitarian efforts, and also new technologies. And some of the things we've seen so far are artificial intelligence has exploded onto the horizon with ChatGPT and other manifestations that are accessible to the public. Some cost a little bit, others like ChatGPT are perfectly free. Also, Apple introduced its Vision Pro virtual reality headset. It's pretty expensive, over $1,000, as I recall, but I understand that it's something which is much more advanced than the Meta Quest 2 virtual reality headset that I use, which you can get for about $300. So again, this is new technology that has the power to change things in the future. Now, in terms of power and groups, I note that now both Finland and Sweden have joined NATO. Okay. Now, on June 11th of 2023, transiting Pluto retrograded back into Capricorn until January 2024. What do I expect with this retrograde back into Capricorn? Well, Capricorn is more conservative. It's ruled by Saturn. That's restriction. So, one last hurrah for dictators, autocrats, and conservatives, and reviews of rules and regulations. What I've observed is that the American Congress is holding hearings on the regulation of artificial intelligence. And this is exactly what I expected. You know, Pluto briefly goes into Aquarius. You get some new technologies on the horizon. But then, before you know it, Pluto turns retrograde. It moves back into Capricorn. And so that's like a pause. We want to think for a bit about what we're doing with this new technology. And in particular, artificial intelligence has made a lot of news, and people are very concerned about what kind of regulations uh, and restrictions we need to put upon artificial intelligence. Now, also, since Pluto has retrograde back into Capricorn, since that moment, the Supreme Court has made some very conservative rulings, which I'll talk about later. Additionally, Trump has he's surging in Republican polls right now. And I didn't have room to put it on this page, but I've noticed that Republican legislatures across the country, they've been working hard uh, to be more restrictive about many things. Uh, often issues involving transgender people and LGBTQ people in general, more and more restrictions on abortion, and book bannings and restrictions upon what can be taught in public schools and universities. Okay, let's take a look at Putin for a moment. This is a transit chart for June 23rd, 2023. The inner circle is Vladimir Putin's chart. I always point out there's a little bit of dispute about his birth data, but this is the chart that everyone I'm familiar with uses, and I've really seen it work quite well. Well, he has transiting Uranus square natal Pluto, and this square, it lasts for a good part of the summer. What's expected is a sudden change in Putin's status, pressure to remove Putin from power. Of course, on June 23rd, when this aspect was pretty strong, it becomes exact on July 30th. Prigozhin and his Wagner group, they rebelled and marched toward Moscow on this day. Well, this is just one of the pressures for change and status in Putin's chart. And he might be able to hold on to power, but I think there's still a 50-50 chance that he will be out of office by the end of the year. It's not for certain because, like I said, he's worked hard at having a firm grip on power, but the pressures are there, both in his natal chart and also in the chart for Russia. It becomes clear from looking at that chart that people want some change. And this month in particular, there's going to be a lot of pressure. So let's just wait and see how that plays out in the long run. Okay, now this entire summer, we have transiting Chiron, not making an exact conjunction to natal Chiron in the USA July 1776 charts, but a very close near conjunction. This is going to be in effect all summer, and Chiron wants to bring about transcendence, and we see some of that, but more often it causes wounding because that hard shell that Saturn erects, it has to be cracked before we can grow and move on. So what's expected is more wounding and transcendence, severe weather, violence, abortion, and LGBTQ issues being in the news. Now let me digress for a moment because history, if not perfectly repeating itself, it's rhyming with itself. So let me point out that from 1972 to 1975, transiting Chiron made a series of oppositions to natal Saturn, a series of conjunctions to natal Chiron in the July 1776 charts for America. These aspects can trigger either wounding, healing, or transcendence, and the major story during this period was the Watergate scandal and the Senate Select Committee to investigate President Nixon and that scandal. Also, the environmental movement was in the news, making big gains at that time, and Roe v. Wade. I believe 1973 was when the Supreme Court recognized a woman's right to have control over her own body and choose an abortion if she wanted. And let me also mention that while Watergate was a wounding of our country at the highest level, the Senate Select Committee on Watergate, that represent one of the finer, more transcended moments of our government. Okay, so that was what was going on in the early 70s. And we're now experiencing both astrologically and in terms of events over the years from 2022 to 2025, things that are similar to what we saw in the 70s. And so far during this period, we've seen the work of the January 6th committee, which again, I think was one of the finer moments of our government. And we've seen ongoing investigations, indictments of Donald Trump. Again, our country has been wounded at the highest level. And an interesting thing to note is that Donald Trump's Chiron is at 14 plus degrees Libra, which is exactly where Saturn is in all of these July 1776 charts that people use for America. And I can think of no one in my lifetime who has wounded America more than Donald Trump. Okay, in addition to this, climate change is big news today, and also Roe v. Wade is big news once again. And so history is at least rhyming with itself, if not repeating itself. This bar graph up here shows the dates of exact conjunctions or oppositions of Chiron to Saturn and conjunctions of transiting Chiron with natal Chiron. And here you can look at this bar to see how throughout the summer we have transiting Chiron not making an exact conjunction with natal Chiron, but getting very, very close, a very, very close near conjunction. Now, what I've observed so far this summer has been a failure of the First Republic Bank, debt ceiling crisis. North Carolina bans nearly all abortions. That's a lot of wounding. But some good stuff. FDA makes an abortion pill available over the counter. Trump found guilty of sexual abuse and defamation. Trump indicted for mishandling classified documents. Trump facing indictment over January 6th. And let's see, I'm making this video on a Wednesday, and Trump might actually be indicted by this Friday. We'll have to wait and see. Proud Boys members were found guilty of seditious conspiracy. And then we've had a lot of severe weather, smoke from Canadian wildfires affecting the north and the northeast, severely affecting the quality of air there. We've had severe rain and flooding, very severe tornado outbreaks, and right now, extremely severe heat waves across the country. Also, train derailment of hazardous materials into the Yellowstone River. And here we get to the Supreme Court. They ruled that affirmative action is unconstitutional when considering university admissions. And they also cited the First Amendment in favoring religious rights over LGBTQ rights. In a case where they said that a woman who makes websites, she doesn't have to make a website for gay couples if she feels that that violates her religious sensibilities. Of course, we are still having lots and lots of mass shootings. A horrible problem that the majority of people in our Congress refuse to effectively address. And lastly, many people I know are experiencing major health problems right now. That could be a coincidence. Since I'm getting older, people I know are getting older, and these things happen as you get older. But it seems like I've known old people for quite a while, but right now, a lot of them are really wounded. So that may indeed be related to transiting Chiron's conjunction with natal Chiron in these USA charts, transits, general transits in the world, general transits to your country. They affect you too, along with your personal transits. Okay, and that is the end of my little scorecard, my astrological scorecard on observed, expected. Let me stop sharing this. And I'm back. So, as I see it, uh, things have turned out very much as I expected. As I've said, you can't really make exact predictions with astrology, even though a lot of people try. If you try to make very specific predictions, say this will definitely happen, well, sometimes you'll hit things right on the target, but a lot of time you're going to miss those exact predictions. Nonetheless, something related to the nature of the planets involved will often happen instead. And if instead of trying to make exact, very, very specific predictions, if you treat astrology as a weather report, then I believe you will understand, uh, you will come to a better understanding of how these things actually work out in physical reality. And in so doing, you will also establish a better connection or understanding of that connection between you as an individual and the cosmos, and how we are part of that cosmos and how it affects us. So, uh, as I see it, things worked out pretty accurately, very much as I expected. And so I might give my weather reports an A+ this time around. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and hopefully you got something out of it. And I'll stop recording now. I hope to see you soon.